Hey, I'm Carl Lanning. Afraid I'm all here by myself this time because of the shutdown of everything. Boy, isn't that a lot of fun. Anyway, I'm Carl Lanning from Brazos River Charter School with This Week in History, specifically the week of March 22nd through 28th. So let's see here. To start off with, at the turn of this century, a poll was done asking those born before 1950 and after 1950 the same question. Question being this, and I'll give you a chance to think about this. We want to pause it here in a moment. The question was born before 1950 or born after 1950, same question. What is the greatest invention or development of your lifetime? So first of all, those born after 1950, what do you think they had to say? Pause it here for a second if you need to. Well, I would imagine you probably got it. The answer in the case of those born after 1950, the computer. Hard to argue with. But those born before 1950, what do you think they came up with? Well, their answer, the polio vaccine. On March 26th of 1953, Dr. Jonas Salk announced the first successful test inoculations of a small group of children and adults. It'd be another 2 years before you started to get large-scale inoculations. 1952 had been the worst year on record for the United States as far as polio. There were a total of 58,000 cases, a little over 3,100 people died, and a little over 21,200 cases resulted in some form of paralysis or another. Another poll was done asking Americans what they feared the most in 1951. And the atomic bomb and polio were essentially tied. Within 5 years, within 6 years, I take that back, a massive inoculation program was begun in the United States, and by 1961, there were only 161 cases total reported in the United States. By 2018, that number was down to 33. Dr. Jonas Salk was seen as being a miracle worker. By all accounts, Dr. Salk was a private, quiet, retiring man. There is a legitimate question as to whether or not he could have patented the polio vaccine, but he never actually attempted to. He wanted it to be produced by as many companies as quickly as possible. And therefore, he passed up on what is estimated to have been about a $7 billion patent. For the rest of his life, though, wherever he went, when he flew, he would be introduced by the pilot and always bumped up to first class. His hotel reservations would become the penthouse suite, and he very rarely ever bought his own meal. I say he earned it. Dr. Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine. Well, last week, if you remember, mentioned this fellow, big-nosed George Parrott, and that pair of shoes, and how they might be a little bit more closely related than you may realize. Well, on March 22nd of 1881, a man of substantially lesser reputation than Dr. Salk, Mr. Parrott, was hanged by a mob in Wyoming. You see, George Parrott was a cattle rustler, he robbed stagecoaches, and was a murderer as well. After a botched train robbery, he and his partner, Dutch Charlie, were on the run from a posse that was sent out to get them. They found themselves a nice hiding spot, ambushed the posse, and killed 2 lawmen. George and Dutch Charlie then split up and went their separate ways. Dutch Charlie was caught first, brought back to Rawlins, Wyoming, and confessed his crime, and an angry lynch mob was not too thrilled with him. About 200 of them showed up, dragged him out of the jail, found a telegraph pole, threw a rope over it, put the other end around his neck, and stood him on a whiskey barrel. When he was asked whether or not he had any last words, a woman who was the widow of one of the slain lawmen said, and I quote, "No, the SOB has nothing to say," and then she kicked the barrel out from under him. Well, eventually, George Parrott was caught up with as well. He also confessed his crimes, was brought back to Rawlins, Wyoming to stand trial. But while he was there, he tried to escape. He used his manacles to beat the jailer and he probably would have gotten away if it were not for the jailer's wife and her pistol. Again, a mob showed up, and he suffered the same fate as his former partner, Dutch Charlie. That's not quite where Big Nose George Parrot's story ends. You see, then enter Dr. John Osborne. John Osborne wanted to study George's brain to see if there was a difference between a normal person's brain and a criminal's brain. So he cut the top off of George's skull and studied his brain, and as best he could tell, there was no difference whatsoever. However, the top of the skull was made as a gift to Dr. Lillian Nelson. This is her much later in life, and that is the top of George's skull. Dr. Osborne gave it to Dr. Nelson as a gift, and she used it as a doorstop for the rest of her medical career before eventually donating it to a museum. But we're not quite done with George yet. You see, Osborne then had, actually he did it himself, skinned Big Nose George, tanned the hide, sent it down to Denver to have it turned into a pair of two-tone shoes and a medical bag. Now, we have no idea what happened to the medical bag, but those are the two-tone shoes right there. And he wore them 12 years later when he was sworn in as the 3rd governor of the state of Wyoming. So, George Parrot and George Parrot. Anyway, there is a small museum in Rawlins, Wyoming today where you can see some of these artifacts. Well, that'll take care of us for this week, but to let you know what's coming up next week, we'll take a look at this couple. You see, they share a very singular place in American matrimonial history as well as the American judicial system history. Well, thank you for the time. I'm Carl Lanning, Brazos River Charter School, and we look forward to seeing you right here next week.